Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. Alright, first question. Hey Jason, can barbell lunges help with deadlifts as they develop the hamstrings? What? Now, I'm not saying that barbell lunges can't help with your deadlift, because they very well might, but your idea that they develop the hamstrings? Very minimally. I'd go so far as to say is that if the barbell lunge was your primary hamstring exercise, you would have extremely weak, tiny, underdeveloped hamstrings, and you'd be very high risk for injury. Just like if the squat was your only hamstring exercise, you're going to have weak, underdeveloped hamstrings. Now, I'm not saying the lunge doesn't work them a little bit, but not even remotely close as any form of deadlift does. Like if you were to do deadlifts of different types, your hamstrings would be 10 times as much muscle growth as you're going to see from a lunge. Okay, they're not used as a primary mover. They're have a synergistic role, because you can't work the quad without working the hamstring to some extent, just like you can't work the tricep without working the bicep. Right? You do know that the bicep gets recruited on a bench press. And in fact, the wider the bench press goes, the more activation you see in the bicep. It's based on EMG studies. And in fact, if the only thing you did was bench press and you had never done any direct bicep work, your biceps would grow a little bit. They're not going to grow a lot. The guy who does curls is going to have way bigger biceps than you, right? But they would grow a little bit. So your hamstrings will grow a little bit from the lunge. But no, if you're talking about building hamstrings, you better do some hamstring work. You need to be doing hip hinges of different types. I recommend good mornings as your base builder. Deadlifts can help. Glute ham raises, even hamstring curls. Big on hamstring training. Lunge is not going to build your hamstrings. Now, could a lunge help your deadlift? You bet. Why? Lunges build the quads and the glutes. Quads can help you on the deadlift. If you have weak quads, you can be a little bit weak off the floor, even on a conventional deadlift. All right, so if your quads are weak and you bring them up, it'll help you pop it off the floor a little better. What about glutes? Well, if you have weak glutes, building your glutes up will help with your deadlift, absolutely. So I'm not saying the barbell lunge can't help with your deadlift, but it's not going to be enormously helpful, and it's sure not going to help your hamstrings. If you're worried about hamstrings, you need to go in and train your actual hamstrings, not rely on a secondary stabilization role to build them any more than you would build your biceps using the bench press, right? You wouldn't do that. Doesn't make any sense. It would help a little bit, but not even remotely close as actually getting in and just training the muscle. All right, next question. Hey coach, I'm doing 5-3-1 right now because it's simple to run and easy to customize accessory work. I follow the 5-3-1 programming for the main lifts, and if it's bench day, for example, I pretty much just do shoulder work a day for sets of 10 or a peak set of 10. I do the same thing for overlapping deadlift work on squat days and whatnot. Does this sound like a good idea, or do you think there's a better way to do it? I've been lifting for years now, so I think conjugate will work better for me, but I'd rather do a Skype session with you and set it up properly than put it together on my own. Thanks. Yeah, come on back, brother. This is a guy who I've actually done a consultation with at some point last year to give him some advice. So, as far as your question goes, I think a lot of that's reasonable. I told people many years ago that to make 5-3-1 work best, you should probably swap accessory work, because to get the overlap you want, you should probably be doing chest work on the overhead press day, and so on and so forth. And you should probably be doing some squat accessories or squatting on the deadlift day, and so on and so forth, because ultimately you may not get enough hypertrophy in all these different muscles doing this. And you could do it a different way and it'd still probably be fine, because you still end up hitting upper twice a week, lower twice a week, with a focus on those big four lifts. And that's perfectly reasonable. And I don't think 5-3-1 is a bad program. And I've said before, as long as your accessory work is dialed in, it's a perfectly acceptable way to run primary exercises, right? As long as you get enough accessory volume in to hypertrophy everything, it'll work fine. Now, I personally think conjugate is better. That's my opinion. Just my opinion, that's it. And I think there's a good amount of evidence to justify that opinion. But 5-3-1 is perfectly acceptable. We have a programming protocol for 4 basic barbell exercises in which you then do significant amounts of hypertrophy work on the backside. Right? That actually works just fine. As long as you get enough workload on the supplemental work. That's the main thing. You have to do enough workload, and you have to pay attention to things like recovery. In other words, you don't want to come in and do a bunch of sets of squats for high reps. All right, you need to do it similar to how we would do conjugate. You would set up your accessory work after the main lifts, right? You need to be looking at stimulus to fatigue ratios. So, I mean, doing on your bench day a bunch of overhead pressing, probably fine. But you need to figure out for yourself, though, does the bench carry over to the press better for you or the press over to the bench? In my case, benching even builds my overhead press. The overhead press doesn't improve my bench. So, therefore, if I did volume overhead pressing, my bench really wouldn't benefit from it. I just know this based on past experience. Right? And I've known guys who were big benchers who've never overhead pressed, and they've gone and tried to do overhead press with 225 for reps, and were able to do it 4 reps the first time they ever really messed with the lift. Because their bench built it. So it really depends on the person, doesn't it? But I would say your idea is good. You know, make sure that you get a good overlap, and don't always think of the bench day and the press day as purely bench and press. Think of them as regular upper body days and train accordingly. Same thing with the deadlift and the squat days. You need to be doing overall lower body volume on those and treat them like upper lower hypertrophy days. Would really be the best way to make it work, in my opinion. So I think you're onto the right idea. All right, next question. Is there much you can do with just a barbell, bench, and dumbbells while living in the top floor apartment? I would get a rack, but I'm concerned about the heavy concentration of weight in one area of the floor. Should I just rent a storage unit to work out in so I can get a rack? I'm just looking to maintain a bit until the guns open back up. I think you meant the gyms. You know what? I mean, a rack would still be fine. You don't necessarily have to go that heavy either. You could do nothing but speed work. Watch my dynamic effort stuff and watch my dynamic effort training. You do realize that basically doing mostly dynamic work to build my lower body and good mornings is what got my box squat back up to 500, right? Hopefully you realize that. Okay, you don't need a lot of heavy weight. And put a nice good piece of wood down on the floor so that you can disperse the pressure further. And you don't necessarily have to deadlift. That would be the biggest concern, would be deadlifting. But you could do speed boxes. You could do speed box squats just fine in an apartment, even without a super strong floor, with no real risk. I would, however, put a nice good piece of plywood down, right, at the very least. You'll be fine. But what can you do with just barbell, bench, dumbbells? You can do a lot. You can do a whole lot. You can obviously train all your upper body. And let's come back over to the other point. You can do speed squats on a box. You could do good mornings, right? You can do all that stuff. You can build a monstrously big bench with that. In fact, you could even do speed deadlifts. Put some rubber pads down on top of the plywood too, and do speed pulls. All right, you could do 2 dynamic effort lower body days, even if you had 6 weeks to work with, right? Let's say you had to do this for 6 weeks straight. You could do 2 dynamic effort lower days where you do speed squats, speed pulls, good mornings. And I bet you, unless you're a super strong bencher already, or a super strong squatter, I keep saying bench, I'm sorry guys. Unless you're a super strong squatter already, I promise you your squat will go up. Like if your max squat right now is 350 pounds and you did that for 6 weeks, I promise you when you get back into a normal gym where you can train heavy again, you will probably PR your squat and your deadlift. Just from doing 2 dynamic effort days, right? You can get away with that even with your concerns up there while keeping the noise minimal, not risking the floor. Totally doable. And you can do all your normal upper body training. And it would be just fine. That's what I would consider for you. Like if you were a client right now, that's what I would actually prescribe for you in that situation. Almost guaranteed, unless you're a rank novice. But even if you were fairly novice, I'd still prescribe it that way based upon the limitations that you have. And I promise you, you'll get bigger and stronger, including on your lower body. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.